The Whitmore Grand's rooftop terrace glittered 40 stories above Chicago, a cathedral of glass and ambition where the city's most powerful people came to remind each other of their worth. The charity gala for the Children's Heart Foundation drew senators, surgeons, and CEOs, people whose names appeared on hospital wings and university endowments, people who had never once stood in line for anything. Nola Birch had been standing near the railing for 11 minutes, watching the lake go dark below. When her ex-fiancé took the microphone, she had known Derek would be here. She had prepared for it. Spent 3 weeks preparing for it. In fact, had chosen her burgundy wrap dress carefully, had stood in front of her bathroom mirror and practiced the particular expression she intended to wear when their eyes met across the room. Composed, unbothered, whole. She had not prepared for what he said. "I want to thank everyone who's been so kind to me and Vanessa during this transition." Derek Colton adjusted the microphone with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to audiences. He was 34 and conventionally handsome in a way that photographed well, which was the primary reason he'd advanced as far as he had in Chicago's philanthropic circuit. As most of you know, it hasn't been the easiest few months. But standing here with the woman I should have chosen from the beginning, he reached for a woman's hand. And the woman who stepped forward was everything the room expected. Lean, blonde, luminous in ivory silk. I can honestly say that some decisions, even the painful ones, lead you exactly where you were meant to be. The room applauded. Nola did not move. She was aware of this very precisely, of her own stillness, of the champagne glass in her hand, of the polite way the couple near her shifted slightly so she wasn't directly in their line of sight. She was 31 years old, and she was a plus-size woman in a room full of people who had just watched her ex-fiancé describe leaving her as arriving where he was meant to be, and every person in that room either knew who she was or was about to find out. She set her champagne glass on a passing tray. She would not cry here. She would not make a face that could be photographed. She would walk to the elevator, press the lobby button with her chin up, and dissolve in her car where no one could see. She made it 4 steps toward the exit before the hand closed around her wrist. Not hard, not aggressive, just certain. The kind of grip that didn't ask permission, but somehow wasn't unkind. "Don't." She turned. The man standing behind her was not someone she recognized from the gala's printed program, though she'd read the program cover to cover, because Nola Birch was the kind of person who read programs. He was tall in the way that made rooms feel smaller, dark-suited, with eyes the color of good bourbon, amber going dark at the edges, and the precise stillness of someone who had learned very early that movement attracted attention, and attention could be fatal. There were 2 men flanking him at a respectful distance. She noticed them the way she noticed exits and fire sprinklers. She noticed everything. "Don't leave," he said. "That's what he wants. I don't know you. No." Something almost imperceptible moved at the corner of his mouth. "But I know you, Nola Birch. Actuarial analyst, Northwestern class of 2015, the woman who single-handedly restructured the payout model for Hartley Insurance 18 months ago and saved them $42 million, which they celebrated by promoting the male colleague who implemented your recommendations." The noise of the gala continued around them. Glasses, laughter, Derek's voice carrying on with his remarks. "That's a very specific thing to know about a stranger," she said carefully. "I'm a very specific kind of person." He released her wrist. She hadn't noticed until now that she hadn't pulled away. "My name is Cormac Vane. Currently, I own this building." Nola looked at him for a long moment. She was good at reading people. Actuaries were, by nature, risk assessors, and people were just probability models in expensive clothing. This man was not performing. He wasn't trying to impress her or recruit her or sell her anything she could name. He was watching Derek Colton the way a chess player watches the board 3 moves ahead. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you to walk back into that room," Cormac Vane said, "and sit at my table, center, floor-to-ceiling window view, the seat that photographs best from the press positions along the east wall." He paused. I also want to offer you a contract. I'm sorry, a business arrangement, 12 months. You accompany me to approximately 2 events per month. Galas, board dinners. Nothing that conflicts with your work schedule. In return, I provide a salary equal to your current annual income, access to my legal team for the Hartley situation, which I'm told is ongoing, and, he glanced once, briefly, at Derek Colton, the particular satisfaction of letting that man spend the next year watching you thrive on his level. The wind off the lake moved through her hair. Somewhere behind her, a woman laughed at something Derek had said. You're offering me a fake relationship, Nola said. I'm offering you a contract, he said again. Those are different things. Relationships, contracts have terms. She should have said no. Every risk assessment instinct she had, every actuarial framework she'd spent 6 years building in her mind, said no. She didn't know this man. He was clearly dangerous in ways she couldn't yet quantify. The arrangement was absurd. I want to see the contract before I agree to anything, she said. He reached inside his jacket and produced a folded document. Of course he had it with him. The next morning, Nola read the contract 4 times. Then she called her best friend, a woman named Blythe, who had known her since college and who responded to most crises by asking if anyone had eaten, and she read it to her over the phone. He had it printed, Blythe said. He had it printed. At a gala he owns the building for. A long pause. Nola, I know you already said yes. Nola looked at the signed copy on her kitchen table. The Hartley clause is real. I had my attorney look at it this morning. He can actually compel them to negotiate. The leverage is, she stopped. It's airtight. I'm not talking about the Hartley clause, Blythe. You said yes because of how he looked at Derek Colton. Nola did not answer, which was between them, the same as confirming it. The first event was a hospital foundation dinner, 3 weeks after the gala. A car arrived for her at 6:30, not a town car, but something black and low and very quiet, driven by a man named Garrett, who handed her a small card when she got in. The card had 2 sentences. The dress I've sent is a suggestion, not a requirement. Wear whatever makes you feel like yourself. The dress was deep green. She wore her own, a wine-red gown with a structured bodice that she'd bought the previous fall and never found an occasion for. When she arrived at the venue, Cormac Vane was standing at the entrance with 2 of his associates, mid-conversation, and he stopped talking the moment she came through the door. He crossed the room to meet her. You wore your own dress, he said. You said it was a suggestion. I did. His eyes moved over her once, not the way men had looked at her before. The cataloguing look, the look that measured and found wanting. This was something else. Assessment, maybe, but the kind that was deciding something in her favor. It's better than what I sent. She didn't know what to do with that, so she said nothing, and he offered his arm, and they walked into the room together. She noticed how the room changed when he entered it. Not dramatically, not parting like a sea, but a subtle recalibration, the way birds on a wire all shift direction simultaneously without any visible signal. People turned. People leaned into each other. She had been at enough events in her professional life to know what power looked like from the outside, and Cormac Vane wore his the way other men wore watches, as something that had always been there, not a performance, but a fact, and she was beside him. She watched 2 women near the bar clock her immediately, the look traveling from her face to her body and back, the quick math of the social hierarchy being run, and then they looked at Cormac's hand at the small of her back, and something shifted in their expressions. Not warmth, exactly, but recalculation. Between the appetizer and the main course, a man named Philip Whitcomb, she recognized him from the financial pages, sat down across from them and began talking at Cormac about a shipping acquisition he wanted access to. He didn't look at her once. After 4 minutes of this, Cormac said, Philip, do you know what Nola does for a living? Whitcomb glanced at her, briefly. Marketing, isn't it? Actuarial analysis, she said pleasantly. Specifically risk modeling for large institutional portfolios. I spent 3 years doing maritime risk assessment before I moved to life tables. But I imagine shipping isn't that complicated. A beat. She's also, Cormac said, lifting his wine glass, significantly smarter than either of us, which is something to keep in mind. Philip Whitcomb spent the rest of the dinner talking to her directly. Afterward, in the car, she looked out the window at the city passing and tried to understand what kind of man made a point of that in a room full of people who would have preferred she was decorative. By the third event, she had stopped expecting to be uncomfortable. This was dangerous, and she knew it. The contract was a contract. Cormac Vane was a business arrangement. She had run the risk assessment in her own head, methodically, column by column, and the output was consistent. Do not mistake professionalism for affection. Do not mistake the way he remembered her coffee order, black, 1 sugar, never the fancy iterations, for anything beyond observation. Do not mistake the fact that he had, on 2 separate occasions, quietly removed people from their social proximity who had said something unkind about her weight. Not with a scene, not with a confrontation, just with a particular quality to her attention that made those people discover urgent reasons to be elsewhere. Do not mistake any of it. She was a contract. She had signed the document herself. The third event was a gallery opening. Contemporary art, aggressive lighting, the kind of crowd that used interesting to describe things they didn't like, and challenging to describe things they found alienating. Nola had a genuine opinion about the piece in the center room, a suspended installation of actuarial tables rendered in glass and steel, of all things, some artist making a point about mortality, and she was standing in front of it when she became aware that Cormac had been watching her for several minutes instead of the room. "You're not working the crowd," she said without turning around. "No." He came to stand beside her. "You're more interesting than the crowd. That's the second time you've said something like that. It's been true both times." He looked at the installation. "Tell me what you see," she told him. She talked about mortality tables and the way this artist had rendered probability as something you could walk through, something physical, something with weight, and how strange it was that most people spent their entire lives being described in columns like these, without ever understanding what the numbers said about them. She talked for longer than she meant to. When she stopped, he said, "You've never had anyone actually listen to you talk about your work, have you?" It wasn't a question. She felt something tighten in her chest. "My ex-fiancé," she said carefully, "thought actuarial work was the kind of thing you summarized at parties, in 1 sentence, preferably with a joke at the end so people didn't feel excluded." "He was afraid of you," Cormac said simply. "Men like that usually are." She looked at him. He was looking at the installation, his profile clean and composed, and she thought about probability, about the columns and the numbers and the way risk assessors were trained to find the thing that was most likely to cause damage and name it clearly. She was starting to understand that the most likely risk here was herself. The Hartley situation came to a head in the 5th month, 6 weeks ahead of anyone's projections, including hers. She got the call on a Tuesday afternoon. Hartley's board wanted a meeting. Cormac's legal team had produced documentation of the intellectual property transfer that was, by her attorney's account, the single most comprehensive IP argument she'd ever seen assembled in under 100 days. She was in the conference room at Cormac's firm when the call ended, and he came in 20 minutes later, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she looked at him across the table and said, "They want to settle." He sat down. "Good, Cormac." She said his name the way she always said it, precisely with intention that imprecision was something he noticed and filed away. And she refused to be imprecise with him. "Why did you do this? This level of legal work costs. I know what it costs." "Then why?" He looked at her for a moment. "Because what they did to you was wrong. And because I could fix it." Those are both sufficient reasons on their own. He picked up his phone, then set it back down. "Also," he said, more quietly, "because I was angry about Hartley, about the fact that a room full of people watched them take credit for your work, and every single one of them let it happen." His voice was even. She'd learned to hear what was underneath the even tone, the thing that didn't move in his voice, was where the real weight was. Including your fiancé, ex-fiancé. Yes. She looked at him across the conference table. The Chicago skyline filled the wall of windows behind him, 40 stories up, and she thought about the first night she'd met him, the way he'd stopped her from leaving a room where she had every reason to leave. She thought about the contract sitting in her filing cabinet at home, signed dated 12 months of specific terms. "Cormac," she said. "Yes, I need you to tell me something honestly." He waited, from the beginning, at the gala. "Was any of it strategic? Was I useful to you in some way I'm not seeing? Because I've looked at it from every angle, and I can't find the return on investment that makes the Hartley clause make sense for you." He was quiet for long enough that she started to regret asking. Then he said, "I watched you set down your champagne glass." When he finished speaking, "You set it down and you lifted your chin, and your face didn't do a single thing that he deserved to see it do." A pause. "I've been in rooms full of people my whole life who were afraid of me, or who wanted something from me, or who performed whatever they thought I needed to see. You were the only person in that room who wasn't performing. You were just surviving, and doing it with more dignity than anyone I've watched in a very long time." He stopped. "That's not a return on investment. That's just what I saw." The city lights were beginning to come on below them, the grid of Chicago resolving into light. "The 12 months are up in 6 weeks, she said. "I know. The contract terminate." "Yes." She opened her mouth to say something that she had planned, something measured and professional about the terms of conclusion. Instead was, "I don't want it to terminate." Something happened in his face. Not much, he was not a man given to much, but something, a careful unlocking. "The contract," he said slowly, "or the arrangement?" "Neither." She held his gaze. "I want to renegotiate. What happened to Derek Colton happened quietly and thoroughly, the way all true consequences happen, not in a single dramatic moment but in a series of doors that stopped opening. The Whitmore Foundation Board, which had been courting him for a vice-chairmanship, found new information about expense account irregularities and declined to move forward. The charitable connections that had elevated him began to reassess. Vanessa, the ivory silk woman, discovered within 4 months that Derek's financial position was considerably more leveraged than he'd represented, and she arrived at her own conclusions. By the time the story became public, Nola Birch's name was no longer attached to it. She had moved on to things that were, by any measure, larger. The renegotiated, which no one did, if anyone saw it, contract, would not have looked like a contract at all. There were no terms, no salary, no clauses about public appearances. There was a single page, and on it, in Cormac's precise handwriting, were 4 words, "Whatever you want, Nola." She had written beneath it, in her own equally precise hand, "Same." Blythe called her on a Sunday morning in November, and the city was doing the quiet thing it did before the first real snow. "So," Blythe said. "So," Nola agreed. "The man who owns the building, among other things, Nola Birch." A pause. "Are you happy?" She was standing at the window of an apartment that was also technically hers now, 40 stories up. The city laid out below her like a probability model she finally understood. Cormac was in the kitchen. She could hear him. He was, improbably, making coffee badly, because he owned 17 businesses and could not operate a standard drip machine, and he refused to admit this, and she had been correcting his method for 3 months without either of them acknowledging what that domesticity meant. "Yes," she said. She meant it precisely. She had spent 31 years being assessed by people who had already decided what she was worth before they looked at her. She had spent a decade shrinking her voice and her appetite and her presence into shapes that were easier for other people to be comfortable around. She had been managed, overlooked, documented in other people's success columns, and left in a room full of glittering witnesses while the man who was supposed to love her explained into a microphone that leaving her was a form of arriving, and then a man she didn't know had said don't, as had said it not as an order but as an offering, and had handed her a contract that was never really about the contract, and had watched her from across rooms the way people usually watched things they intended to keep. She set her phone down and looked at the city. Somewhere below her, in the columns of numbers she'd spent her career learning to read, the probabilities had already been running. She understood now what they had been calculating all along: not risk, not exposure, not the careful accounting of what could go wrong. Potential, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that waits quietly in the margin of a page until someone finally looks up and reads it.